When an individual goes missing, it's no laughing matter, but it's much less amusing when even the Earth can't seem to find a speck of their life force. The enigmatic nature of these events may be unsettling or frightening to you, but that's not our focus here. All that is concealed is the reality that transpires when nature chooses to break its rules. Barry Zeldin. Even the most cheerful and charismatic people can face tragic events, despite the hope that their positive nature might protect them. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey changed forever after a particular incident, losing its unique charm, despite being home to hunters. Barry Zeldin's disappearance remains unsolved. Barry, a 74-year-old man who lived in rural New Jersey, was nothing more than a reflection of his surroundings. Something about the serenity and calmness made him adore his home. Given that his house was surrounded by thickets of forest, which he didn't mind, it's no surprise that he was a hunter. In fact, the hunting did not bring him to New Jersey. Instead, moving to this area after retirement kindled his enjoyment of game hunting. On Monday, October 7, 2013, Mr. Zeldin had taken a walk away from his home that day after informing his wife about his planned hunting expedition, which involved placing bait at a deer stand near Chatsworth. It sounded simple compared to his previous exploits, but the feedback was shocking because he never returned, and there was not a clue whatsoever. Mrs. Zeldin wasn't worried when her husband didn't return home or call her on Monday night, because he was known to go on spontaneous hunting trips that could last several days. However, on Tuesday and Wednesday, she called him at regular intervals, but all of her calls went to voicemail. On Thursday, she attempted to drive to the Audubon Gun Club, where her husband and other hunters who were members were always expected to sign in so that other hunters knew who was out there, but she was unable to find the club. Thankfully, she found the club on Friday, a bungalow in the middle of the woods, and discovered that her husband had signed in at 9:55 a.m. Monday morning. Her worry grew. She had a couple of members go out in search of Barry that Friday night, but they couldn't find anything. On Saturday, Wilbur Swales, president of the gun club, and 3 other members discovered his 1992 Chevy Blazer SUV. The windows were open, his keys were in the ignition, his phone was on the dashboard, and his dog Taffy was inside, but Mr. Zeldin was not present. Mrs. Zeldin hoped Taffy was still alive, fueling herself with hope that her husband hadn't left her in a long time and would likely return soon. Still, a part of her knew that their dog was alive because she most likely ate the corn and molasses for the deer and must have drank rainwater since the windows were open. The New Jersey State Police and State Park Police were alerted, and they searched for the missing hunter employing canines and helicopters. The search was called off on Sunday afternoon, considering there was no sign of Zeldin. On Tuesday, volunteers from Burlington County Canine Search and Rescue attempted but failed to locate victims of any kind. Mrs. Zeldin was gravely worried and increasingly saddened. She didn't want to think that her husband was dead because he was outstanding in the woods and very independent. But when she remembered that he had type 2 diabetes and had multiple strokes in the past, and he didn't have his medication with him, plus he loved his dog Taffy so much that he wouldn't leave her alone, she couldn't help but wonder if something had indeed gone terribly wrong. It was difficult to believe that 2 days before he left, they celebrated their 50th anniversary with a delicious dinner of coconut shrimp and tilapia at the Chart House in Atlantic City's Nugget Casino. Now she was alone, uncertain of where her husband was. As unbelievable as it may seem, Mr. Zeldin's disappearance was a reality. It was surprising, given how smoothly Zeldin evolved as he hunted in the woods more and more, as formidable as the legendary Jim Corbett or even Fred Bear, with keen eyes honed by years of experience, scanning the underbrush with an intensity rivaled only by the predators that lurk within. With each step, he became one with the rhythm of the wilderness, his senses attuned to even the smallest movements, despite his advanced age. But in the end, what really happened? Because he was nowhere to be seen, heard, or found. What happened to Mr. Zeldin? is a question we still ask today, as no one knows where he is. Alvy Webb. It was an unusual and baffling situation that left everyone puzzled. Alvy Webb, an 86-year-old former teacher and principal from Muldrow, Oklahoma, was known for his active lifestyle and love for hunting, which didn't diminish with age. Contrary to what one might expect of someone his age, Alvy remained mentally sharp and physically active. He enjoyed hunting, especially around the holidays when most of his friends and family would accompany him. Elk hunting in particular was something he never missed. The adventure of hiking, camping, and hunting elk released dopamine, which he couldn't hate. Every year during the elk hunting season, Alvy went out on elk hunting trips with his son, grandson, and other men. This was typically around October in Oklahoma. They would camp near Route 564A. They knew the area well, especially since they'd been hunting elk there for 5 years. Mr. Webb eagerly anticipated the elk hunting season and the tradition of elk hunting with his family and friends each year. On October 19, 2019, Alvy, dressed in an orange stocking cap and a hunter's vest over a heavy camouflage jacket, set off to hunting. His family led him to the location, 100 yards down a trail near a meadow where he had hunted the previous year. The west area of the Colorado Trail was rugged and mountainous. Mountains that stretch for long distances and have relatively high peaks. The mountains were manageable enough for Alvy to hike. With summer drawing to a close, he was hoping to find some elk. He was very familiar with the setting and had a handful of food bars and water to get him through the day. They agreed to pick him up at the bottom of the hill on the road around 10 a.m., leaving him alone. He was left on the lonely trail with only a few people passing by. You could occasionally hear a car zooming by and the birds bickering. Even in the season, the surrounding trees were towering, but weren't particularly evergreen. It was the sort of place where people would harvest firewood for camping, or in this case, to hunt elk. When the hunting party members returned to check on him several hours later, they couldn't find him. It was strange and unsettling, because where could an elderly veteran like him have wandered? They looked for him where they left him and where they said they would find him, but there was no trace. Had he gone back? Was he lost somewhere? These were the questions they asked each other. The hunters didn't wait to find out, instead contacting authorities around 4 p.m. to report Mr. Webb missing. A more extensive search party was organized, and another mission began around 5 p.m., but still he was not found. On Friday, October 18th, Alvy's cell phone battery died, and the authorities' attempts to pick up a signal were unsuccessful. Steve Nolan, the Montezuma County Sheriff, and his rescue team, a canine search and rescue team, and Mr. Webb's friends and family conducted an on-the-ground search of the area, 30 yards at a time, but nothing was found, no clues of any kind, just scattered features of the serene, elevated natural setting, and no sign of Mr. Webb. By 9 a.m. on Monday, while 25 searchers were scouring the area, someone reported hearing a muffled gunshot. When it was checked, there was no evidence of any dead animals. The search was eventually called off, but Sheriff Steve Nolan stated they would continue if any clues were provided. Alvy's family and friends continued to search the area for a while, but eventually stopped. After this, the temperature of the area wasn't the only thing that dropped. People who lived there were also caught in grief and constantly wore puzzled looks because of Mr. Webb's unknown whereabouts. It's still unclear where the 86-year-old man, who struggled to walk at his age, went. He wasn't disabled and was mentally alert, so it was strange that he wandered away. He just disappeared. Mr. Webb's disappearance terrified and shocked the people of Muldrow, and for a long time, people were afraid to hike, let alone go elk hunting. There were even a few rumors about what happened to Mr. Webb, from being eaten by animals to most likely falling into a deep ditch, to being consumed by wildfire, to possibly becoming unconscious due to the mountain's hypoxic conditions and falling into something, none of which provided accurate answers to what must have happened to him. Mr. Webb is still missing to this day, and it doesn't seem like he'll ever be found. Tyler Doyle. The incidents that lead to these disappearances become increasingly shocking, as does the realization that the circumstances surrounding their disappearances are not unusual. Tyler Doyle's story is identical to the previous two, with the exception that he was much younger. Tyler Doyle was a 23-year-old duck hunter from Loris, South Carolina. He had recently married his wife, who was at the time expecting their child. Duck hunting was common in that part of the country because it was surrounded by water bodies that served as habitats for ducks, and Tyler was no stranger to it, as were his sea maneuvering exploits. The incident occurred on January 26, 2023, while Tyler was duck hunting on a john boat near the Little River Inlet. The river was calm, with only a few intermittent tides. The atmosphere was chilly, and he hoped the ducks were out. The water current was normal, at least compared to others he had encountered. There weren't many boats on the river that day. In fact, he had not seen any yet, which was not unusual. Doyle's boat kept stalling and being pulled by the water of the North Jetties to where the intercoastal waterway meets the Atlantic Ocean in the Little River area. He was duck hunting with his friend, whom he dropped off on the North Jetties, and then motored around to leave duck decoys. He called his friend and explained what was going on. His friend contacted 911, who then notified the Coast Guard. It was a tense scenario, but not particularly disturbing compared to previous occasions. However, fate didn't care, as Doyle was last seen by his friend on the bow of his boat with the tide carrying it out to sea. Tyler Doyle could not be found despite searches by several agencies, including the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, or SCDNR, Horry County Fire Rescue, and Civil Air Patrol on land, in water, and in the air. 5 days after his disappearance, on January 31st, his aunt and others discovered his waders while searching for him off the coast of North Carolina. This discovery gave his family hope because it indicated they were close to his body. Taylor Doyle's missing case was widely discussed on social media, with many people sharing information about what happened. This case received much attention, and people began developing theories about what happened to him. Some speculated that Doyle must have met foul play, but SCDNR lead investigator Ronnie Floyd ruled in a statement written 2 weeks after his disappearance that there was no evidence to suggest that Mr. Doyle met foul play, and that he believes he drowned and remains missing. According to Lakeland's Facebook post, Doyle's wife gave birth to their child Paisley in April. Doyle's family's hearts were lifted momentarily as everyone was pleased. Doyle's family announced in May that he had been added to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. On December 5th, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division was asked to join the case. This has made no difference so far, as Tyler Doyle remains missing. We remain hopeful that he will be found someday. Sean Higgins. Mysterious scenarios occur frequently, but something about them taking place in a familiar setting is not only mysterious, but also disturbing. Identical to the story of Sean Higgins, a 41-year-old man living in Coos Bay, Oregon, with his wife and children. On Friday, October 14, 2016, Sean, his 21-year-old son Trevor, and his brother went hunting in the Shasta Costa drainage near Bear Camp. Sean and Trevor dropped off Trevor's uncle in another region of the woods before driving to where they were supposed to meet later that day and parking their truck. Sean knew the area well and was confident that the trip into the woods would be quick, so he opted not to bring his backpack, which contained a GPS, with him. The two parties, Trevor and his father, parted ways, expecting to reunite later and pick up their uncle, who had been dropped off earlier. After a few hours, Trevor arrived at the meeting point and waited for his father. Eventually, his uncle arrived at the agreed-upon meeting point. They waited for a while, thinking that something had gone wrong because Sean would not normally spend so much time hunting. They decided to split up and look for him. When Trevor's uncle returned to the truck without Sean, hoping to find him waiting for the both of them, he discovered that not only Sean was missing, but Trevor as well. Trevor's uncle contacted the Curry County Sheriff's Office. Stephanie, Sean's wife, learned early that morning that both her husband and son were missing, and she was stunned. That Saturday, search and rescue teams from several counties across the state joined the Curry County Search and Rescue Team in scouring the harsh terrain in bad weather in search of two men. The search ended after dark with no sign of them. This continued for 4 days before Trevor was discovered about 2.5 miles from where he entered the woods to look for his father. Apparently, what happened was that as Trevor went into the dense forest that night in search of his father, it became extremely dark, and instead of risking going deeper into the forest, he decided to stay where he was and build a shelter. The next day, he got lost and had to wait for search and rescue to find him. He was found 4 days later, suffering from severe hypothermia caused by his prolonged exposure to the cold, wet weather. The United States Coast Guard airlifted him. The Coast Guard made its way to Bay Area Hospital. Nonetheless, he desired to know if his father had been located, but there was no good news. The search for Sean continued with several search and rescue personnel, as well as canines, drones, helicopters, and a large number of volunteers. Despite the bad weather, hundreds of people turned out to support the vigorous search for Sean. 9 days later, on Sean's 42nd birthday, October 23rd, the search party began to disperse. Sean's friends and co-workers continued to search, but on October 25, 2016, the Sheriff's Department suspended the search because in the 11 days since Sean had vanished, search teams had found no trace of him and were no closer to knowing his whereabouts. With so much time passing, the odds were against his survival. Despite the announcement, Sean's sister Tara Fisher refused to give up. Smaller search parties have been looking for Sean over the years, and conspiracy theories about what happened to him have spread, ranging from drug cartels to Bigfoot. Some believe Sean fell into a treacherous ravine that search teams were unable to reach, while others believe he is no longer in the woods. Sean's case remains open as missing, and the Curry County Sheriff's Office is still seeking answers. Trevor Basil. Forging strong connections isn't just about bonding with family and friends. It's about weaving ties within your community, a powerful yet often underestimated tool for personal growth. Trevor Basil's journey vividly illustrates the impact of such bonds. All accounts have been very similar, with the highlights being individual disappearances and unique characteristics. However, the reactions differed slightly. The community's reaction to this story is definitely worth it. On Friday, August 14, 2020, Trevor Basil left his home in Panaca, Nevada, causing concern. Trevor was an art teacher, husband, father, and well-known community member. As strange as it sounds, rock hunting was common in this area, and he had a long-standing passion for it. He had done it several times before, sometimes staying out late at night. One particular day, Mr. Basil went rock hunting in the hills. The summer air and sunshine made it an ideal day for rock hunting, a day that seasoned enthusiasts rarely missed. But on this specific day, things didn't go as expected, as he never returned. When he didn't come home that night, his family conducted a search and found his vehicle in the hills near Miller Wash, north of Panaca, but there was no sign of Mr. Basil. He was definitely missing. When the sheriff learned of his disappearance, he did not have enough officers to handle the search because many of his rescue personnel were out of the area at the time. He decided to issue a call for volunteers to be recruited for the search. The next day, more than 100 volunteers gathered outside the Panaca market and set out to look for signs of Basil. Basil was tracked 7 miles throughout the area, and after hours of searching, they discovered a bucket full of rock, which they assumed Basil had collected along with a towel. Despite this finding, he was not found that day. On the second day of the search, a grid search was performed in the area surrounding the bucket. Basil's family directed the volunteers where to go while flying drones in the sky. The search was carried out using various vehicles, including horses, ATVs, and dirt bikes. By the end of the second day, the area had been thoroughly searched, and even the search dogs could not detect Basil's scent. The next day, the Nevada Department of Forestry assisted with the investigation by dispatching a crew to aid in the search. This time, the search was conducted closer to Basil's vehicle in hopes that he had gotten lost on his way to it. After more than 12 hours of scouring the area's mountains and ditches, the day ended. The efforts of the Basil family, his friend Sean Frenner, and local organizations were highly praised. The volunteer turnout was hailed as one of the largest ever seen in Lincoln County. A Facebook page was created to help organize and inform the community about the search for Trevor Basil. This Facebook page is full of beautiful messages from well-wishers. A few businesses nationwide participated in the search, and a local food truck provided free food for the search teams. Sean Frenner also posted on her page that 5 cadaver dog teams would search the area later, but they were still unable to locate him. Basil's wife was highly grateful for the time and effort put into her cause. The community effort, as well as their prayers and heartfelt wishes, were enough to inspire Mr. Basil's family to persevere in their search for him.